It's time for a Big Blue Kickoff Live.
Nobody can ever tell you that you couldn't do it, because you did.
On Giants.com.
You know what I saw? New York Giant Pride.
And the Giants mobile app.
17-14 is the final. One touchdown, we are world champions. Believe it, and it will happen.
Part of the Giants Podcast Network.
Let's go out there like a bunch of crazy dogs. Have some fun.
Welcome to Tuesday's edition of Big Blue Kickoff Live here on Giants.com as well as YouTube. You can tune in on the mobile app. He's Matt Citak. I'm Lance Medow with you for the next 60 minutes. It is presented by Cadillac, the official luxury vehicle of the New York Giants. Multiple ways you can interact with us here on the program. You give us a ring, 201-939-4513. You can also hit us up on Twitter, hashtag Giants Chat. He's at Matt Citak, one word. I am at Lance Medow, one word, last name Medow. As we'll look ahead to the matchup in the Mile High on Sunday. It'll be a later start for the Giants, 4:05 p.m. Eastern, given they're out on the West Coast area type of thing. So that will be somewhat of an adjustment, as well as the thin air. But I think there's more to break down than necessarily the geographical issues or challenges that may be presented. And any takeaways and anything you want to add from the Eagles matchup, certainly we won't turn you away from that perspective. And I want to start here, Matt, and it's amazing. We're already into week 7. Time is flying as we move forward here into the midterm area of October. But this, I would say, and this is not hyperbole, I don't think this is an exaggeration by any means. I went through all their opponents. I think Denver is the toughest defense by far that the Giants will have faced up to this point this season in terms of just the overall makeup of the unit, the balance. You talk about the 30 sacks leads the NFL, but it's more impressive that 12 different players have at least half a sack. Their secondary is stingy. They have good cover guys. They're not overly opportunistic this season. The interception numbers don't jump off the page, but they just have really good, solid veterans that can go out, handle their assignments. They play a lot of zone defense too. At least they've been doing that lately, and they're very stingy in defending, Matt, the facets that the Giants are thriving in right now. And that's the other reason why I want to point that out, because what are the Giants doing effectively? They're running the football with the combination of Jackson Dart and Cam Skattebo. What does Denver do very well? Well, they're a top 10 rushing defense. I mean, they're allowing under 100 rushing yards per game, which in the NFL is quite impressive. So it's not just overall that Denver's defense has been solid. It's the fact that they've honed in on the areas that the Giants are starting to turn the corner. I think this will be a really good litmus test, specifically in terms of the Giants' offense against Denver's defense, as to where this team is and where potentially they're headed.
Yeah, I mean, you said that this Broncos defense is the toughest defense the Giants will have faced up to date. I think it's the toughest defense they're going to face all season. I mean, they are the number 2 scoring defense as of right now, the number 2 defense in terms of yards allowed. They have the sack leader. They have the guy who's probably the top cornerback in the entire NFL in Pat Surtain, Nick Benito being the sack leader.
Sure.
This is an extremely, extremely talented defense. They have guys on all 3 levels that you need to keep an eye on. Otherwise, they're game wreckers. They have game wreckers at all 3 levels. And it cannot be understated how good of a coach Vance Joseph is. He is doing such a tremendous job with this unit this season. You know, he had his failed tenure as a NFL head coach.
Well, he was in Denver, actually.
Yeah, but he is a phenomenal defensive coordinator, and he has all of these guys playing at such a high level. I mean, last week's game for them, I mean, they played the Jets, so I don't want to put too much into that. But, you know, the week before they held the Eagles to 17 points, and now while the Eagles are obviously have their own struggles, and the Giants did the same thing to the Philadelphia, that's still a very potent offense that the Broncos basically just manhandled. So this is going to be an extremely, extremely tough matchup. You know, this is going to be a real tough test for Jackson Dart. He's played very well his first 3 starts, but the matchup he faces this weekend is just in a whole other ballpark compared to the last 3 weeks. And that's no slight towards, you know, the Eagles, the Chargers, and the Saints. But this is just on another level of a matchup. You know, Vance Joseph is going to try to confuse Jackson all game with this. He's going to disguise his looks. Blitzes are going to be coming. Like, this is not a team that's going to let Jackson just sit in the pocket with time, let the routes develop and hit his open receivers. Like, they're going to come after him, which I will say in last week's game, Jackson Dart did play extremely well when under pressure. Granted, the Eagles did not get much pressure, but on the 6 pass attempts when the Eagles were pressuring him, Jackson was 4 for 6 for, I believe it was 95 yards and a touchdown and a passer rating of 140 something. So he has some success when pressured, but again, this is just a whole nother ballpark with this Broncos defense. And, we've also spoken a lot about how great Andrew Thomas has been playing, and he really has been. He looks like the Andrew Thomas of 2022 that was an all-pro. But he's going to face his toughest matchup as well with Nick Bonitto. Again, the only guy in the NFL that has more sacks than Brian Burns right now is Nick Bonitto. He is playing like an all-pro. So just all around for the Giants offense, this is going to be an extremely difficult matchup.
And putting the sacks aside, Nick Bonitto and Zach Allen, who was a great addition from Arizona 2 years ago, lead the NFL in quarterback hits with 16 apiece, and they have over 60 as a team. So it's not a matter of them just finishing, it's a matter of them impacting the quarterback to perhaps turn the ball over or not be able to follow through with a pass. Now, you brought up Vance Joseph maybe bringing pressure. What I find fascinating about Denver's defense thus far this season, they actually have been very successful with just their front four. He hasn't had to bring as much pressure, I think, maybe as he had anticipated. I don't know the numbers up to date with the Jets game, but going into the Jets game in London, Matt, they had 21 sacks because they had 9 alone against the Jets. 14 of those 21 sacks through the first 5 weeks of the season were without a blitz, which says, I think, an awful lot about it's not just Vance Joseph's philosophy, it's the effectiveness of the group that he can say, the defensive tackles or the defensive ends or some of our outside linebackers, we're going to bring 4 guys up into the trenches. We feel really good about our secondary, and they're going to win. So it's going to be interesting if Vance Joseph goes to maybe a different area and becomes overly aggressive. I don't see why, though, he would change things up. If his group has been so effective without blitzing, getting home, I would think at least through the first quarter, you see whether or not they can get to Jackson Dart, and if they're ineffective, then maybe you press the buttons and you dial it up. But this may be a game where Jackson just has to rely on his offensive line going 5 against 4 and seeing whether or not they can handle it. I guess my bigger concern is this going to be the first game through the 3 starts that you had mentioned that Dart has played thus far? He's been able to rely on a steady run game with Cam. But Denver can take away the run game. If Dart does not have that balance, this may be the first game where the onus is more on the quarterback trying to solve the riddle with heavy passing attack as opposed to 3rd and 3s and 3rd and 2s where they could simply hand the ball to Cam Scatterbo and their other running back. So those dynamics, I think, is something to watch in Sunday's matchup.
Yeah, I mean, you mentioned the not blitzing as much. Again, I think it's going to come down to whether or not Andrew Thomas can contain Nick Bonitto because Nick Bonitto, 8 sacks, leads the NFL. If Andrew Thomas can, I'm not going to say shut him down because the way Bonito's playing, I don't know if any offensive tackle is going to completely
well, they haven't
shut
been
him
successful
down.
in that department thus far.
But just if they can contain him, that is what I think would lead to Vance Joseph then saying, all right, we got to send some blitzes because our number 1 guy is not able to get to the quarterback as consistent as he has been all season. I mean, you look at who has a sack on the Broncos. They have double-digit players on defense with a sack.
Yeah.
And that's because sometimes he will just send a guy that, the opposing offense line is just not expecting to blitz, and they've had just clear paths to the quarterback. In terms of the run game, obviously Jackson Dart's ability to rush the ball himself, that is a difficult matchup for opposing defenses to contain. Any dual threat quarterback is a little harder to contain that run game. But you look at the last 2 weeks, the Broncos have faced Justin Fields and Jalen Hurts. Now, Jalen Hurts, I'll say, lately has not been running the ball as much. He only had 2 carries for 3 yards in that game. So that, we could have a whole episode just talking about the Eagles' offensive struggles.
Sure.
But last week, containing Justin Fields to just 31 yards on 7 carries, Justin Fields, basically the only thing he's been able to do well this season is run the football. And to contain him to just 31 yards, that was, a tremendous win for the Broncos defense and played a huge role in them the Jets only scoring 11 points, 2 of which were from a safety, correct? So
Yeah,
They
well,
only actually allowed 9 points. I mean, you look at the numbers. The Broncos defense allowed 82 total yards.
I brought that up on yesterday's show. It's
Justin Fields
ridiculous.
had negative, or the Jets as a team had negative 10 passing yards because sack numbers get included into that number. That's insane. I would think that the Giants and Jackson Dart, despite it only being his 4th start, will be able to have more success than that. I would hope at least. But yeah, again, like I agree with you. This is going to come down to Jackson having to make more plays, probably with his arm, than he maybe has had to do the last couple of weeks. And again, going up against this secondary, Pat Surtain, Riley Moss. I mean, this is extremely Hufanga, the
Who's
safety.
an excellent player, yeah.
Like this is going to be very tough for Jackson, especially going to Denver, flying across the country. Mile High is not an easy stadium to play in. This is going to be a tough matchup. If Jackson Dart steps up and can show that, is able to play well in this game, then moving forward, every single opposing defense is going to have to, not that they're not taking him seriously already, but this can be sort of like a statement performance from Jackson. If he can step up and have success against this defense, then it's like for the rest of the schedule, like to our opponents, buckle up because this offense is now for real.
And I do believe that this is going to be the first game where he is going to be challenged, where this potential performance is going to be more on his arm than his legs, because I'll take it a step further. And by the way, Brandon Jones is no slouch too. Their other safety for the Broncos. But you brought up the 2 most recent mobile quarterbacks that Denver has gone up against. If you take it a step further, they also played Justin Herbert, who is capable of running wild. Herbert, 2 runs for 6 yards in that game. And then the previous week, they went up against a name that Giants fans are very familiar with, Daniel Jones. He ran 6 times for 2 yards. So I would say over the entirety of the season thus far, Matt, there has not been one running mobile-esque quarterback that has even had double-digit rushing yards against Denver. Jalen Hurts we went over, Justin Fields, Justin Herbert, Daniel Jones. I did not look over, and this was his first start, so I'm not expecting much. They played Cam Ward.
Didn't even run the ball.
Yeah, so there you go. He didn't even run the ball. So I wasn't missing anything by skipping over that. Because, Cam does have athleticism.
Oh, for sure.
And they played the Bengals. We don't have to look at that without Joe Burrow. So the bottom line is there has not been one team that is known for saying, hey, we're going to give the green light to the quarterback. The quarterback is a facet of the run game that could say they made an indent against Denver. So it's not a stretch to say this is going to be more of a pass-heavy attack. And what we mean by that also is nobody's saying that Jackson Dart should be going into this game throwing 50-yard bombs. You could get the screen game going, short intermediate routes. That's an extension of the run game. It's just, it may be very tough sledding to be that bulldozing type of team that they have been against this Denver squad, which, we've been praising their pass rush, but clearly those guys are just as effective in terms of stopping the run. And how many times, Matt, do you talk about good front sevens in the NFL? They're great at getting after the quarterback. They're great at wreaking havoc, but they actually struggle en route to getting to the quarterback and stopping the run. Denver is not that type of team. Denver is top 10 in the NFL in terms of sacks and stopping the run. And that's not necessarily synonymous with one another. That's why this defense is for real. And I think we've seen enough of a sample size where you're not saying, well, we got to see 2 more games to be sold on what Vance Joseph and this group is doing. They've been sensational. And Nick Bonito, by the way, is another great example that you can find a pass rusher outside of the first round. You can prepare accordingly. You can develop. And he can turn into a heck of a player. And I don't want to bottle us down into numbers and overwhelm the audience, but we were talking about this season. Believe it or not, Matt, Nick Bonito has 21 and a half sacks, and this includes the Jets' performance in the last 21 games. And, it's just nuts. I mean, that's pretty much, the math is easy. It's a sack per game during that stretch, and that goes back to, I want to say, week 3 of last season. The last time Denver had somebody that you could entertain in that ballpark was a guy by the name of Von Miller. So if that doesn't tell you where he is already in his career, I don't know what spells it out. Nick Bonito is for real. And I think Denver also is the latest defense where it's easy. We're overwhelmed in this fantasy-esque world, right, where you look at a team and the first thing you do is you look for names. I don't recognize anybody on defense. They can't be that good. Zach Allen and Nick Bonito are not household names. I would say, right, Matt, outside of the Denver faithful, we know Broncos fans know those guys well. If you took the average NFL fan and threw those two guys out, I'm not saying everybody wouldn't know them, but I don't think the bulk would be enthralled with those two names. Don't be fooled. This Denver team is your typical X's and O's solid. The group's fitting together. They're playing well as opposed to these big names that you'd want to put on your fantasy team or you'd want to draft accordingly.
Yeah, I mean, as you said, the average NFL fan might not know Nick Bonito's name, but they certainly will after this year because right now he is the leading candidate for Defensive Player of the Year. So that is one way to certainly put yourself
no doubt about it.
On the radar. And as if we didn't give you enough, kind of scary statistics and numbers about this Broncos defense. Through 6 games, they have the number 1 ranked third down defense, the number 1 ranked fourth down defense, and the number 1 ranked red zone defense. So all key situations,
that's the trifecta.
Circumstances, they lead the league. So again, I would say the one thing, and not that even that they have struggled on, because I think teams are just not wanting to test this like secondary because of how good it is, but through 6 games, the Broncos only have 1 interception. That's the one stat you can look at on there is where it's not great, obviously. So in that sense, maybe Jackson, take some chances. I would say I would not want to throw the ball too often in Pat Surtain's direction, but take some chances down the field with, whatever wide receivers are playing in this game. Obviously, we don't know what the status of Darius Slayton's going to be after missing last week's game, but maybe take some chances. I mean, that's like the only thing I can think of, maybe of a way to somewhat test this defense. I mean, again, they have not been too opportunistic, but that can change very quickly. In 1 week, that can go, from 1 interception to 4 interceptions very easily with the guys they have on this side of the ball.
Well, and also because of the length up front, if they're so good at pursuing the quarterback, all it takes is for them to get a hand up in the passing lane, Matt, a batted ball, and that could easily be an interception. So I think you got to be careful from that standpoint. Now, since they don't have a high allotment of takeaways, they actually are -3 in turnover differential. Not that Bo Nix has been careless with the ball, but they just don't have the takeaways to balance out the few turnovers they've had on offense. And that brings us to the other side of the ball, because we've obviously been talking a lot about the defense. This offense has also been very good in pass protection. Bo Nix has only been sacked 6 times. That's the second fewest in the NFL this season. 5 is the standard. That's the highest number. And they're a top 10 rushing offense. J.K. Dobbins has fit very well after he ran for the Chargers last season. And R.J. Harvey, their rookie, is not as high in terms of usage, but he's averaging nearly 5 yards per carry. So between the two of them, and Nix can also run the ball. He's only run the ball 33 times over the course of the first 6 games, but he's at least mobile enough that he can extend plays. So their MO is on the ground. I think both teams actually, interestingly, Matt, are coming in with the same philosophy. We want this to be a quarterback game. We want Bo Nix to throw the ball. We want Jackson Dart to throw the ball. And we don't want either team to be able to fall back on the rushing attack. And Denver, Cortland Sutton is by far their number 1 wide receiver, and they have some complementary weapons. Troy Franklin played college ball with Bo Nix at Oregon. He's shown some flashes. Marvin Mims is the take the top off the football guy, but he's hit or miss. There are games where he has that big home run, and there are games where he hasn't done much of anything. Evan Ingram has started to pick up as of late, a name that Giants fans are familiar with. So outside of Cortland Sutton, they don't necessarily have maybe a true number 2, but Bo Nix doesn't shy away from spreading the wealth, and clearly he has not been put in a position because of the defense and the low scoring that you talked about where he's had to shoulder the load. I mean, even in that Eagles game, 17 points, and they were down 17-3 early. Denver shut out the Eagles in the second half pretty much. So, Denver, all their offense had to do was score 18 points. They're more than comfortable hanging in the low to high teens and winning a game ugly 20-17 when it's all said and done. when it's all said and done, the defense does such a good job taking pressure off of the offense, where Bo Nix and company, they don't have to get involved in a shootout, and they don't have to necessarily even entertain 30 points. I mean, I would say the Colts game, I believe, was the highest scoring contest, right, that they've had thus far. Yeah, it was 29-28. They lost that game, and they did lose to the Chargers 23-20. Their 4 wins, Tennessee scored 12, the Bengals scored 3, the Eagles 17, and the Jets 11. So, once again, Denver gets to 20 points. Their defense answers the call. They're sitting pretty based on the trends this season.
Yeah, they just don't need to put up a lot of points to win games. They know that. Yeah. That's how they're going to approach this game and every single game. We talked about the whole Andrew Thomas, Nick Bonitto matchup. Well, there's a similar matchup on the other side of the ball. You mentioned how Bo Nix has had time to operate in the pocket. That's mostly because of Garrett Bowles. Garrett Bowles has been just as good as a left tackle as Nick Bonitto has been rushing the passer. He's been fantastic, and he's the left tackle, which means he's going to face a whole lot of Brian Burns, who, as I mentioned earlier, number 2 in the league in sacks. So both sides of the ball, that left tackle versus right edge rusher matchup is going to be, just get your popcorn ready. It's going to be fantastic matchups. The right tackle, also pretty good. Mike McGlinchey. Not having nearly as good of a season as Garrett Bowles, but that's just saying more about Bowles than McGlinchey. But that's going to be, a tough matchup for Kayvon Thibodeau as well. But that is one that I think Kayvon can take advantage of. I would say maybe more so than, Burns going one-on-one versus Garrett Bowles. The pass rush, as we've seen, when the pass rush is given situations where they can pin their ears back and get after the quarterback, they tend to hit home, or at the very least get pressure on the quarterback and force the quarterback to scramble, to make mistakes. It's not going to be the easiest thing to do against this Broncos team. One area I would say that is a little more able to be attacked is the interior of the offensive line. Another familiar face just got his first start at left guard for the Broncos this past week and struggled pretty mightily, and that is Matt Parrott, as you guys probably all remember him. He is now their starting left guard, because I forgot who it was that was starting, got hurt. I get placed on IR, so now Matt Parrott, unless they have a lineup change after one game, he is their starting left guard. And then Luke Wattenberg at center, Quinn Myers at right guard. Not as good as the 2 tackles. Not bad, but not as good as the 2 tackles. So, maybe this is the game that Dexter Lawrence sort of breaks out. We've all been waiting for that to happen the last couple of weeks. He's had his flashes, he's gotten some pressures, but still yet to record a sack, and that's after a career-high 9 sacks last year. So maybe this is the sort of breakout game for Dexter Lawrence. That would be a huge boost to the defense if Dex could have that game, because we've all seen when he is at his A game, he is a complete game wrecker. He will blow up the opposing offensive line, just wreak havoc on the quarterback, force the quarterback to basically play nervous the entire game. And guess what? That's going to set the edge rushers and Abdul, wherever Abdul Carter is lined up on the field, that's going to set those guys up for great success. So let's see. I have a feeling this could be Dex's, somewhat coming out party. We'll see. That would be a huge boost.
Well, he's also going to be integral in terms of helping slow down that Denver run game. Depending, of course, how the Broncos attack the Giants, and if they feel that there is too much penetration inside, Bo Nix, he may utilize the running backs with those short passes to help maybe generate some rushing production just through another means. If you look at their running backs, R.J. Harvey has 16 receptions. Dobbins has not been utilized much as a guy out of the backfield, but that could be an area that we see them tackle if they don't feel, once again, that they can get good penetration, because once again, the strength of the Broncos' offensive line is more the exterior than the interior.
Yeah, we didn't really talk about J.K. Dobbins at all. He's another guy having a underratedly great season so far, averaging nearly 5 yards per carry. He really has looked very good, and with all of the injuries that guy has had over the years, honestly, just kudos to him. It is impressive what he's come back from. He looks like the J.K. Dobbins that we have seen in flashes from years past, but doing it on a consistent week in and week out basis. That is why a big reason why this Broncos offense has had success, because Bo Nix has not had to just shoulder the whole entire, offensive load himself. he's relied on those two running backs, but really it's mostly been Dobbins. Harvey, as you mentioned, has been more of a factor in the passing game, but the way that Dobbins is running the football, I mean, it's really just taking a burden off of Bo Nix and allowing the offense to sort of just operate as a unit way more freely.
Well, he did a nice job with the Chargers last season. Baltimore is where he had his fair share of injuries, couldn't stay healthy. I thought he revitalized his career a little bit with L.A., but he's picked up exactly where he left off. He's got 4 rushing touchdowns. As you mentioned, the average yardage per carry jumps off the page, and it does wonders. Listen, it may be the boring response because we talk a lot about it within the context of Jackson Dart and any other Giants quarterback, but in the NFL, if you give, whether it's a veteran or you give a young QB a run game that he can rely on, where he doesn't have to throw 45 times a game, they may not light up the scoreboard, but you're going to give your team a fighting chance. And that's what Denver is doing. And Sean Payton's been around enough quarterbacks in his day, okay, even outside of Drew Brees, to understand the importance of the ground attack. And he knows he's still working with a relatively young quarterback. Bo Nix is only in year 2, had a nice rookie season, and he knew that it was critical to complement him with a variety of backs to prepare for injuries, and so far that has worked out very well. Denver is the prototypical definition of what you want to see in an NFL team. They win in the trenches on both sides of the ball. They win up front with their offensive line, therefore they're running the ball, protecting the quarterback, they're getting penetration and stopping the run, and obviously they're hitting and sacking the opposing quarterback. It's the textbook definition of, if you were to script the ideal NFL team strategy, you can go in every week, you can give yourself a fighting chance, you can win football games. It would pop out of the computer, the Denver Broncos. To me, that is the best way to describe them. We are broadcasting from the Giants Podcast Studio, presented by Hackensack Meridian Health. Keep getting better. He's Matt Citak. I'm Lance Medow. This is Tuesday's edition of Big Blue Kickoff Live. It's presented by Cadillac, the official luxury vehicle of the New York Giants. We're going to open up the phone lines at 201-939-4513.
By the way, it was Ben Powers was the left
was
guard
the other offensive lineman that got hurt.
Matt Parrott's replacing him. That left guard center combination is definitely where the Giants are going to want to attack Bo Nix come Sunday.
And remember, with stunts and twists, they can also use some of the defensive ends in that department too. Let's head to the phone lines, and we check in with Eddie in Rockland, joining us here on BBKL. What's happening, Eddie?
What's up, fellas? My concern is I watch the Giants as they're developing, and it looks good. You know, Dart's a little bit erratic with the bouncing off of people, but he's getting lucky. But I'm worried about him getting blindsided. My question is to you, as we go on to the season, do you think the Giants will make Dable go into his final year as a lame coach? And what do you think it would take to get a 3-year extension out of the Giants before the start of the next year?
All right, well, we'll let you go on that note, and I appreciate the phone call, Eddie. I mean, as far as contracts in general, and this is me saying an overall thought process, not just necessarily pertaining to Giants personnel, as we've seen in life, extensions, whether you get them or not, don't necessarily hold much weight because you could turn around and still change a coach 1 or 2 years into an extension. So I wouldn't get so caught up in that. I think what, Matt, we've seen in the NFL, and coincidentally, we're actually coming on this program a day after, we didn't mention because we've been living in the Giants bubble, Tennessee actually fired Brian Callahan yesterday, who was only in his second year as the head coach, and they just drafted a quarterback in Cam Ward. So Ward now, going into year 2, and I know I'm getting a little bit ahead of myself, is going to have a new head coach and a new offensive system because, let's face it, highly unlikely the new coach retains the current coaching staff. So, you know, those are the things you always have to take into consideration. Jackson Dart is showing some really nice positive flashes. You know, this is the regime that drafted him. Continuity is a staple of success in the NFL. And the teams that subscribe to that, where they preach patience, they let the development process work out, normally get rewarded. It's not a guarantee, but I would say that side of the coin is far more reasonable to follow than the idea of constant change. So there's no formula to say this person has to do this to buy themselves that. I think right now you've got to be happy with the fact that they made the change, Matt, to Jackson Dart. He seems to be fitting in quite well. The Giants coaching staff has prepared him well. And this is going to be yet another litmus test. As I mentioned, any coach will tell you there's always boxes that you got to check off as you go through, especially the first year of a quarterback. And you want to see, how do they handle the quarterback room? How do they interact with their teammates from a leadership perspective? How do they take command of the scheme? What do they adjust in terms of the second half when all of a sudden the defense throws them looks that they didn't see in the first half? And I think so far so good. But once again, as we've been talking about, this is the theme of the show. The Broncos are cut from a completely different cloth than anything I think that Jackson Dart has seen, whether it be on the collegiate level or the NFL level. So I think anybody inside and outside the building is very anxious to see, okay, does he rise to the occasion, or does Denver pretty much have similar success that we've seen with these other mobile quarterbacks that we've talked about?
Yeah, you brought up the whole Titans-Callahan situation. This I thought was interesting, and I hadn't even realized this until Adam Schefter tweeted it out.
I saw that, yeah.
The last 4 quarterbacks that were taken number 1 overall, going back to Trevor Lawrence in 2021, then Bryce Young in 2023, Caleb Williams last year, Cam Ward this year. All 4 of them had their head coach fired during their rookie seasons. I agree with you that continuity is extremely an underrated aspect of the NFL. A lot of fans call for changes when things are not going well, and I get it. But continuity, teams really do rely on that. And it really does provide, not always, but a lot of the time provides a boost, being able to just have the same guys out there. Obviously, there are some situations that call for changes, of course. But in terms of, the Giants and the current coaching staff, I would say it's week 7. There's still a lot of football left to be played. I mean, the way that everyone sort of feels about the team right now, honestly, is a lot different than how everyone felt about the team 1 week ago from today. So as we see each and every year, this is a week-by-week league. Things change very, very quickly in the NFL. I mean, if the Giants can put together a winning streak or just win a couple of their next games, vibes are going to feel a lot different than they did just a week ago or a couple of weeks ago. So in terms of just the caller's original question, I would say it's week 7. There's a lot that can change one way or the other. I'm not saying it's guaranteed to go one way, but there's just a lot of football left to be played. Let's see how the season goes out before we start talking about, the status of the coaching staff.
Yeah, I mean, you got to wait out everything in the National Football League. I was talking about this with Paul Matt on yesterday's program, and I thought, once again, the Giants had their most impressive performance specifically against the Eagles in at least a decade, and I don't think that's a stretch at all in terms of outplaying Philly up front. But now the challenge gets even tougher against the Denver Broncos. So if you think you swung at the Eagles, you made contact, okay, and you got them wobbly, okay, and they fell up against the ropes, that's great. But now all of a sudden the Broncos have been preparing for this fight, and they've been building up steam and a lot of momentum over the last few weeks, and it has no relevance to what you did against the Philadelphia Eagles. And success doesn't get bottled up in the NFL. You don't put it in the suitcase. You take it with you. You roll it out, and it blows up, against those kiddie toys, those whatever the hell they call it, the slides and everything that I'm referring to. It's not so easy in the National Football League, and Denver is going to pose a completely different challenge than the Philadelphia Eagles. And it's not to bring Giants fans down in terms of the level of enthusiasm, Matt. It's just that's the nature of the beast. And if you just look at the bit of the roller coaster, right, that the Giants have been on, and I think even Giants fans in self-reflection will say after the Chiefs game, they were 0-3, right?
Yep.
And if you ask most Giants fans, they weren't feeling good. Then Jackson Dart gets his first start, and they won a close game with the Chargers and a lot of excitement, okay? And then what happens the following week? The Giants turn the ball over 5 times, and they lose to the Saints. And then everybody's back to disappointment. And now they beat the Eagles on Thursday night. So you see, the point is it's been up and down and up and down. So we've got to see more before you can really get a good grasp of what this team is about. And it goes back to there were 3 press conferences with the players. We had Wan'Dale Robinson, Andrew Thomas, and Kayvon Thibodeau spoke to the media the other day. And I didn't think anything was said that was out of the ordinary. But the one constant question that was brought up, Matt, if you saw, was if you could summarize the identity of this Giants team, right? That question was asked a lot. I think normally that's the case if somebody's writing a story about that team.
Of course.
But the question was answered about, winning in the trenches and getting after the quarterback and running the ball effectively. And listen, any player that's asked the question on, do you think that the way you showed up one game can be duplicated? What is a player supposed to say? No, I have no faith. Whatever we did against Philadelphia, Matt, disappear, throw it out the window. No, of course they're going to have confidence. So you have to at least take a step back and put that in perspective. But in fairness, I just went through the last 3 Giants games. If I was to have a conversation with somebody like you or somebody that's not actually putting on a uniform playing for the team, the common sense reaction is it has been hard for them to duplicate what they did the previous week, right? So that is still looming over the head of this team as to what can you hang your hat on and what can you feel good about will roll over week to week. And I would say the jury is still very out on that front.
Yeah, I mean, going back a couple of weeks, or going even before the season started, when you looked at the Giants' schedule, I mean, everyone circled the Week 5 game against the Saints as
Yep.
Not that it definitely will be, but that should be an easy win for the Giants. Meanwhile, they lost by 12 points, sandwiched between beating the Chargers and beating the Eagles. So, yeah, things change just week by week. Obviously, this whole season is a roller coaster ride of emotions. And obviously, the upcoming schedule is not doing the Giants any favors because obviously going to Denver this week, then going to Philadelphia next week, 17 days after the Giants just kind of embarrassed them on Thursday Night Football in front of the entire country. If you don't think the Eagles team is going to come out with their hair on fire looking for revenge, I don't know what to tell you. Then the week after, San Francisco, which they obviously have had their own injury issues. They've been devastated by injuries, but we're talking about a couple weeks from now when you would expect, barring any new injuries, Brock Purdy should be back, George Kittle should be back, Ricky Pearsall should be back, Juwan Jennings should be back, maybe even Brandon Ayuk. That might be a little still too early for him, but it's possible. Yeah. So their offense could look completely different. Now they'll still have, Bosa and Fred Warner missing from the defense, but that's another story. Then after that, going to Chicago just last night went to Washington and beat the Commanders team that beat the Giants week 1. Then the Packers, who, again, they've had their own fair share of ups and downs this season, followed by Detroit, and then New England, who all of a sudden is in first place of the AFC East above Buffalo. So this upcoming schedule is just a gauntlet. There's no easy game in this entire schedule. So we're going to find out about this Giants team one way or the other. This is sort of just like a sink or swim moment for this team. I mean, we spoke weeks ago about how we didn't know when, but this is before Jackson was named starting quarterback. We don't know when there's no soft landing spot to throw him in there because this schedule, basically until the bye week, is just extremely difficult. So we're going to find out whether or not, this team is more like the team that we saw against the Eagles this past week, or if it's more like this team that we saw a couple weeks ago in New Orleans that obviously disappointed. So we're going to find out one way or the other. This upcoming stretch especially is just, it's like a sink or swim moment for this team.
Let's head back to the phone lines. Lucas is in New Jersey joining us here on BBKL. What's happening, Lucas?
What's happening? Hey, Lance, Matt. If I could, I wanted to open with my sentiments on the Giants, make a quick point about the opening drive last week, and then just ask 2 questions, and I can take it off air.
Sure, yeah, you can start with your sentiments. Absolutely.
So I'm really hype about the Giants. The last 3 weeks were looking great for the most part. The Chargers game, we were up the entire time. The Saints, I felt we owned them for most of the first half. And the entire Eagles game, at least to me, I felt confident in our team, so I'm really happy. Those are my sentiments. On the opening drive, 2nd and 7, Dart almost threw that pick. It was right into, I forget whose hands, and I don't know how he drops it, but it was kind of like a moment where the football gods showed us that, we're in their favor again, it seemed like. And, the entire game felt like we were in the driver's seat mostly. And it seems like we found the formula for success for not only the coach, but for our organization, with the scat running and Dart, feeling the pocket like a magician. Eli was good about feeling the pocket and taking a sack in a way that wouldn't scramble his noggin. I don't think Dart does it like that. But I'll go to my 2 questions. Do you think Bo Nix is better than Jackson Dart right now? And what is your early guess on the season sack totals for our defense?
All right, well, we'll let you go on that note. Appreciate the phone call. As far as who's better, I mean, Bo Nix is clearly a better quarterback than Jackson Dart because he has more experience and he has more games under his belt. So, I mean, I'm not going to say it's a silly question. I understand Giants fans are excited about their quarterback, and rightfully so, but in terms of, comparison and putting one quarterback up against another, as Matt and I just went over, Jackson Dart has started 3 games in his career. If you really expect me to say that a quarterback after 3 starts is better than any other veteran, or at least one guy that's had a full season under his belt, I mean, that would be an absolutely ridiculous statement. So I really don't think there's much to unravel on that front. As far as the sack total is concerned, you mentioned Brian Burns with his 7 is right behind Nick Bonito. The good thing about Denver, and this is where I think the Giants can certainly continue to pile it up and finish relatively high, is you get one guy that does a lot of the heavy lifting, but the Broncos have great balance, 12 players with at least half a sack. So if the Giants are going to get in that territory, meaning top 5, top 7 if you want to go by the end of the season, it's critical for somebody not named Brian Burns, I should say multiple people not named Brian Burns, to sprinkle in. And I'm not saying, Matt, that you need somebody else that has double-digit sacks, but you need a few guys with 2 to 3 sacks each, and that's how all of a sudden you get your total up in that area. Though Denver is in the region of a little bit historical context where I don't know if it's reasonable to think you can scratch the surface of that, but you could certainly aim to finish in the top 10. I don't think that's crazy at all.
Yeah, so I'm going to touch on the first one real quick. I understand the question just because obviously the Giants last year were in a position to take Bo Nix if they chose to, and they obviously decided to take Malik Neighbors, which has paid off. All I will say, I agree completely with you, Lance, that it's way too early to say that Jackson Dart is a better quarterback than Bo Nix, because Bo Nix has had more success and more experience underneath his belt. The only thing I will add is that I think those 2 young quarterbacks landed with the perfect head coaches to utilize their strengths in their respective offenses. Bo Nix is the perfect quarterback for Sean Payton, and it sure seems like Jackson Dart is the perfect quarterback for Brian Dable. So I think both teams are quite happy with how that played out. In terms of the sacks, right now the Giants have, 13
yeah.
sacks on the season, which is right middle of the NFL. They are tied for the 15th highest. I think we can all agree that the first 6 weeks of the season, the defense, I would say, hasn't been an amazing performance by the defense. I mean, certainly going into the year, we all expected the defense to sort of carry this team. I don't think that's necessarily been the case, obviously. I mean, they've had its moments, and the moments where the defense really stepped up and showed the potential of what they can be, but on a consistent week in and week out basis, it hasn't quite been to that elite level, which I think a lot of us were expecting. And even, the guys themselves, the players themselves going into the season said, look, we haven't done anything yet. Don't anoint us as the best pass rush or the best defense in the NFL. We haven't done anything yet. Hopefully now with the offense producing more consistently, that's going to take some of the burden off of the defense to have to play like perfect ball every single week. And I do think that sack number, as we get onto the season, will rise in terms of the league rankings in sacks. I do think this unit is obviously still capable of being top 10 in the NFL.
Yeah, that's why I threw that out. I think that's reasonable.
Last year, they were a top 10 unit, and that was without Abdul Carter and with several guys dealing with injuries throughout the season. So, and just in terms of Denver, I mean, let's not forget, there was a point last year, I want to say around this same time, maybe a little bit earlier in the year, where the Giants were on pace to shatter the NFL record for sacks in a season. And then those numbers tapered off, of course, did not quite reach there. But just looking at this Denver Broncos, 30 sacks in 6 games, that's a crazy number. I mean, it's 10 sacks more than any other team, which is insane. I agree with you. I don't think that's necessarily sustainable. As good as their defense is and as talented as they are on, again, all 3 levels, it's going to be tough for them to have, average 5 sacks a game. So in terms of the Giants, though, right now 13th, middle of the pack. I do think they are definitely capable of cracking the top 10. Obviously, it's going to take a little bit of a increase in production, especially from the big name guys. I mean, again, Dexter Lawrence still does not have a sack this year. Abdul Carter has half a sack. Brian Burns has been doing his fair share. You can see a little more from Kayvon. I mean, Kayvon's gotten a lot of pressure and has gotten very close on a lot of occasions. See him finish a couple of more. And then I think we're going to see the Giants skyrocket their way up with this list.
Well, Burns has 7 of the 13. So, I mean, do the math. They only have 6 outside of Burns, and only 5 players have recorded at least half a sack.
Yeah.
Denver has 12. That's why I keep bringing that up just as a means of comparison. If you're going to finish in the top 10, you're not going to be a team where 1 or 2 guys has the bulk of your sacks. You're going to get some of the safeties are going to get a sack. A corner may have a sack. Your linebackers. And the Giants, at this point, they don't have enough diversity. There's not enough distribution. So I agree with you, Matt. It is about the Kayvon Thibodeaux, the Abdul Carters, the Brian Burns increasing their tallies, but it goes even beyond that. You need your complementary players like Denver has to sprinkle in a handful of sacks. So, I mean, Elijah Garcia right now has more sacks than a number of other notable names on the defensive side of the ball for the Giants. So that should really tell you all you need to. And just using context from last season, if you remember, there was 1 or 2 games last season where the Giants had an 8 or 9 sack game that really helped skyrocket their numbers. For example, the Cleveland Browns game, if you remember, Cleveland lost about 8 offensive linemen, it seemed, in that game, and the Giants just kept eating. And hey, you got to take advantage of that. I'm not trying to take anything away from it, but that also helps a team get into that territory. For example, Denver's coming off a game. They had 9 sacks against the Jets. You need, if you want to finish in that territory, you need at least 2 to 3 games where the numbers are essentially astronomical. And Denver has had that already too, which has helped the cause immensely. Let's head back to the phone lines as we move forward here. We got Andrew in Virginia with us on Big Blue Kickoff Live. What's happening, Andrew?
Hey, guys. Love the show. I'm worried about a regression for the wide receivers in this game, and I was wondering what you guys see happening at practice this week to prevent that, and what are they doing to simulate contested catches, just because that seems like the toughest part of the pass catcher is just not being able to come down with a contested catch. So are they doing anything to prevent that? Over. Thank you.
Yeah, you got a bit. Are you still there? Yeah. Did he leave, or Andrew? You still there? Yeah. I just wanted, in order to answer your question, I just wanted clarification. You were talking about the aggressiveness of the Giants wide receivers this week. Is that what your question is pertaining to?
Yeah. And how are they going to working through some of their headaches in regards to winning a contested catch? And how are they? Is there a way to simulate that in practice?
Gotcha. Okay. No, I appreciate the question and appreciate the phone call. Remember, we're limited in terms of, at this point in the regular season, what we could see at practice. There's only a small media session each day. That's number one. But, I mean, we could talk certainly in terms of things that could be done. What you see a lot, Matt, at least most coaches try to do, and remember, there's only so much physicality they're going to showcase over the course of practice because they don't want to sustain injuries. They want to keep these guys fresh. But what you see, for example, is in order to help a quarterback deal with pressure in his face, they'll put a broom up and they'll have the quarterback try to work around that. You could really do the same thing with respect to the secondary. You could have objects that you utilize to get in the way of receivers and see whether or not they can manipulate their body to make the catch. That's more often than not what you see coaching staffs implement to try to simulate not necessarily the physicality, but maybe the idea that clearly you're not going to be wide open 30 yards down the field and all of a sudden the ball's just going to fall into the bucket. So little things like that, I think, are the best way to at least prepare a player for what they may have to go up against come the weekend.
Yeah, unfortunately, during the regular season, our access to practice is extremely limited compared to training camp, where we're watching the entire thing. There's only about a 10, maybe 15-minute window that we are allowed to watch practice, so we don't fully know what's going on throughout the entire session. But one thing that I saw them do during training camp, I would assume to some degree that they're doing it again throughout the season, is exactly what you said in terms of trying to simulate contested catches. Is they have the receivers go up for catches, and then an assistant coach hold what kind of looks like a broom, but where the actual broom part normally is sort of It looks like kind of like a punching bag almost, and or a punching glove, and they use it to sort of like knock the guy's arms and hands as he's catching the ball. That's kind of like the best you're going to get is simulated contested catches, other than just obviously, you're having drills, offense versus defense. Defense is trying to, the corners are trying to stop the receivers from catching the ball. That probably is your number one best, practice at simulating the contested catches. But in terms of, maybe individual drills, during training camp at least, we saw a lot of the assistant coaches with those, sticks with the punching glove at the end, and they just knock the receivers, tight ends, even running backs, anyone trying to catch. And we see it with the guys in the secondary too, simulating interceptions, contested interceptions, with the coaches taking the stick and, hitting their arms and hands as they're trying to come down with the ball.
And that brings us to, actually, let's talk a little bit about the receiving core, because I think that's a big storyline regardless of the Denver matchup. Darius Slayton, as you mentioned, his status, we don't know, and Brian Dable will speak to the media on Wednesday when we'll have our first injury report. But at least he has some turnaround time, given he didn't play on Thursday. I thought little Jordan Humphrey did a nice job taking advantage of his opportunities, and that was a name we threw out last week that probably could capitalize. They actually, on that front, they re-signed Juice Wells, Jackson Dart's former college teammate. He was just added to the practice squad the other day. Doesn't mean he's going to be called up, but they're bringing back players that at least are familiar with the offensive scheme, which is understandable. And then Jalen Hyatt also had some targets, probably more so than we've seen. He had 5 targets and hauled in 3 catches for 17 yards. And one of the catches was right on the sideline where I would classify it was contested. I was impressed. He got his hands on the football, brought it towards his body, and recorded the reception. And that was actually, we've received calls on this front, Matt, about whether or not the Giants would start utilizing Jalen Hyatt a little bit more outside of the explosive play home run routes. And I think we got a taste of that, actually, against the Eagles, where they were utilizing him a little bit closer to the quarterback. And maybe this is a way for him to build his confidence, get a few catches under his belt, and then they can explore the deep ball. But that, I thought, was another interesting facet. Little Jordan Humphrey taking advantage of his opportunities and the usage of Hyatt. Those, I would say, were the 2 developments that at least caught my attention coming out of this last contest.
100%. I mean, I think prior to last week's game, we were all, a little hesitant to say that we can expect that much from Hyatt, because really he hadn't been asked to do really anything all season. The coaching staff wasn't really putting him out there. So I was honestly a little bit surprised that we saw him with the production and the efficiency that he had against the Eagles last Thursday. I mean, as you mentioned, 3 catches for 17 yards. That's no deep pass. That's not a deep ball right there. So it seems like they are, giving him more of an opportunity to sort of expand his route tree, which is good. I mean, obviously the Giants spent a 3rd-round pick to get him a couple years ago, moved up to get him. Now is the opportunity to see what the kid's got. I mean, if he's going to produce, now is the time with all of the injuries the Giants have at the wide receiver position. And in terms of little Jordan Humphrey, I was very happy that he finally got an opportunity, because that was someone that I thought could have made an argument that he should have made the team out of training camp, honestly. He had a very good performance throughout the summer, was a reliable target for all 3 quarterbacks. So that contested grab, the last caller talking about contested grabs. Well, that throw to little Jordan Humphrey down the field, setting up the first touchdown, was a fantastic contested grab. I think little Jordan Humphrey, earned himself another elevation this week, or at least playing one way or the other, signed to the active roster, practice squad elevation, whatever it might be. I think he really stepped up in his, somewhat limited opportunities. 4 for 55. He had 8, led the team with 8 targets. Kind of crazy considering, again, was on the practice squad a week ago.
I don't mean to cut you off, but remember, he and Dart had good chemistry in the preseason. Remember, he threw that touchdown against Buffalo. Yeah, so I think while it was a pleasant surprise maybe, because once again, he hadn't gotten a lot of opportunities, not a surprising or stunning development, because there was a good rapport. And even Brian Dable, I thought, subtly had mentioned after the game that, talking to Dart during the week, one of the guys he felt good about was reconnecting with little Jordan Humphrey for that very reason.
Yeah, I mean, you look at the roster, all the receivers the Giants have, they don't have anyone like little Jordan Humphrey in terms of his size. I mean,
or name, I should say, too, but go ahead, yeah.
The closest would be Theo Johnson, but obviously he is a tight end. He's not a wide receiver that's going to, run some deep routes. the Giants don't have a wide receiver of little Jordan Humphrey's size anywhere else on the roster. So it makes sense to me that Jackson Dart feels good about throwing the ball up and giving his big-bodied receiver an opportunity to make a play down the field, because as great as some of the other receivers are on this Giants team, I mean, outside of Malik Neighbors, who's obviously done for the year, Giants don't really have any other like downfield contested, go up and get the ball sort of receivers. That's not Darius Slayton's strengths. Is he capable of making some plays like that? Yeah, but you're not going to want to rely on him doing that, several times a game. Obviously, Wan'Dale Robinson, with his size, he's not jumping up and, mossing a cornerback that often. So I was glad Little Jordan got an opportunity. I think he's going to get more opportunities moving forward. He could earn himself, with Darius Slayton's injury in the short term, could earn himself a role on this team for the rest of the season if he has another strong game or two.
Yeah, and that's why the Giants have been turning to internal candidates, which is natural to do. I'm not saying that they wouldn't make a move, but you have to understand, anyone you were to bring in that was not with the team in training camp is going to need some time to A, learn the offense, and B, build chemistry with Jackson Dart. So that's not going to happen overnight. That's why the only practical game plan is for the Giants to give players that made an impression on them over the course of the summer, training camp, and during practice, what they're seeing on a daily basis, an opportunity. That's the whole point of having a practice squad with guys that were in camp, right? What's the purpose, Matt, I would say, of keeping them on the roster if you're not going to turn to them under these circumstances with an injury? The other thing, while we're reflecting on little Jordan Humphrey, that comes to the forefront, there's been a trend that every time a player goes up against his former team, it's the revenge game.
Oh, yeah.
Right? Rico Dowdle went up against the Cowboys last week. It was the Rico Dowdle revenge game. So I'll give you two. Maybe it's the little Jordan Humphrey revenge game. He did play for Denver for 2 seasons, okay? And then, of course, you have Evan Ingram. Not the first time. Remember, with Jacksonville, the Giants already played him. But so if you're looking for both sides of the equation, if that's your cup of tea, you could get that free and pass that on. We will not charge you accordingly if you're looking for storylines.
Had a revenge game against the Giants last week. Didn't turn out too great for that guy.
Oh, you talking about Saquon Barkley.
Yeah.
Okay, sure. Well, I'm not saying it works wonders. That was not what I was insinuating.
Revenge games, you brought up Ingram. I just had to bring it up.
I mean, do you want to go? I don't think anyone has ever labeled it this way, the Matt Parrott revenge game too. You could go, has anyone actually taken an offensive lineman? Because you don't really compute statistics other than, I guess, pressures given up and sacks allowed. But if you really want to go deep, okay, you got the Matt Parrott revenge game. But we kid, of course, on that front. That's not necessarily what the Giants nor the Broncos are thinking about. But in all seriousness, little Jordan Humphrey, he's the guy to watch if Darius Slayton can't play. If Darius can get back, then you'll have him, you'll have Wan'Dale Robinson, you'll have little Jordan Humphrey, you'll have Jalen Hyatt. And I think that foursome in conjunction with, remember, they're utilizing the tight ends a lot more too, should at least give them enough personnel. If Darius is not ready to go, is it possible they give somebody else an opportunity, whether it's a Bo Collins? I mean, even though Juice Wells just came back, he does know the offense. So it wouldn't be a stretch if they decided to call him up. But I would think little Jordan Humphrey, based on what he proved in the regular season setting and his familiarity, they would ride him again if Slayton can't go, more so than anyone else getting a huge boost here in terms of the personnel.
If we're talking about the wide receivers, of course, the last 48 hours or so, there were some reports from like Adam Schefter and some other reporters, more about just the general
big picture,
picture, possible trade candidates from around the NFL. They listed a bunch of guys. There were some rumblings that the Giants could potentially be interested in wide receivers. We're saying all this stuff about giving the guys on the roster a chance. Make no mistake, the trade deadline's not for another few weeks. If the Giants give these guys internally an opportunity and they fall on their face and it is a failed experiment, then that could be an option that the Giants turn to. For now, especially coming off of the win last week, I think you want to give the guys that are already in the building, that are familiar with the offense, an opportunity to duplicate last week or show what they can do, especially if the Giants receivers can have success this week against this secondary. That obviously would be a very eye-opening performance. Now, I did bring this up to Paul a couple weeks ago, and he just immediately shot it down, so I feel a little vindicated that, it's not completely incorrect. But I mentioned that the only situation that I would kind of see and want the Giants to pursue potentially a wide receiver is if it's someone that's under contract beyond this year, that can be part of this team for the future, for Jackson Dart development, not just in 2025, but 2026, 2027, beyond just this season. So, we all saw the list of names that were out there from Adam Schefter. Obviously, a couple of those names, in theory, I would love to, bring in here because they're just good football players, good wide receivers that would obviously provide a boost to the offense. So I'm not saying that the Giants should forget about that and ignore it and just 100% roll with who they have, period, end of story. But let's see what these guys can do against a couple of tough matchups coming up. And again, if it doesn't look good, if it looks quite bad, then there's still time to make that potential move. I mean, the deadline is, I believe, November 4th. It's October 14th. So that's several weeks away for these guys to show what they can do or can't do. And then, we'll see. But I would think that if the Giants were to make any sort of move like that, it would be someone that they would plan to have beyond just this season. Someone that can be that, that number 2 receiver with a healthy Malik Neighbors and help Jackson Dart with his development this year and beyond.
Well, 2 things. They pushed the trade deadline back because I think they want to give teams ample time to evaluate their current roster.
Which makes sense.
And you've seen, at least right now, a lot of teams are bunched together. And the next 3 or 4 weeks may create separation. So if you're a general manager, right now you may be aggressive, but all of a sudden 3-4 weeks, it changes. Yep. I'm with you. I think where this team is right now, first of all, a 1-year rental doesn't necessarily do much of anything other than maybe provide a splash. I think given you just brought in a young quarterback, you want to build around the young quarterback. So if you are going to entertain a trade and you're going to give up assets, by the way, I would much rather have a player that's under my control beyond this season than give away something and then all of a sudden I have to compete with the free agent market to have to re-sign him. So I think that is a sound, rational thought in terms of the approach. But at the same time, I also think developing and seeing what you have in-house, given it's a first-year quarterback, it's a young running back, you're building, the necessity is not overwhelming that you have to infuse the roster with a wow me guy. I think they at least have some leeway in that department. And I also think while the NFL is ultra competitive and nobody should be feeling good about the security of their job and say, oh, they're making me feel good, they're giving me a pat on the back, I do think for a young team, it does send a strong message to the rest of the roster to say, hey, you worked your tail off during camp. We noticed it. We gave you a spot on the 53 of the practice squad, and now we're going to reward you when somebody else gets hurt. I do think that other players take notice of that because then they come to the realization, all right, what I'm sacrificing, what I'm running on the scout team, there's a pathway for me to actually get up on a game day. Not to take it for granted, and I think for a young team, that could maybe be a little bit more encouraging. If it's a veteran team, it's a little bit different, but this is a relatively young team, at least at the receiver position that we're talking about, that there's nothing wrong with then riding the youth a little bit as it stands right now, especially based on where they are in the standings and who's throwing them the football. So,
yeah, I mean, it was only a couple seasons ago that the Giants signed Isaiah Hodgins to the practice squad, ended up elevating him, and in half a season he scored 5 touchdowns and played a big role in that 2022 playoff run.
Sure.
And that was not, some big splashy trade that the Giants did, giving up assets. And, 2022, obviously the expectations going into that season were not high. No one expected the Giants to make that playoff run. They obviously surprised everyone. I would say it feels somewhat similar. Like going into the season, not too many people had written the Giants down for making a playoff run or being serious playoff contenders. Now, that could change with a couple of wins now, especially given how the rest of the division is currently looking in the NFC East. But that is the sort of route I would think you would at least try first. And that's a similar situation to, elevating little Jordan Humphrey and giving him a chance. Obviously, he's been with the team all year, wasn't signing him to the practice squad during the season, but that's the sort of move you got to try first. And if that doesn't work and you're still in it and there's a trade that potentially makes sense for both this year and the future without giving up like too many significant key assets, then that's something that you potentially pursue.
And the other common element between Hodgins and little Jordan Humphrey is they both had previous NFL experience. Hodgins had been with the Bills. He was hurt, But little Jordan Humphrey's been in the NFL. It's not like you're calling up a guy that's a bit of the land of the unknown.
Yeah.
He has been on NFL teams, so you at least have an idea of what he can do in games. It's not as if you're rolling the dice and you're hoping for the best. There's been film, and clearly he knows the system and once again has fit in well thus far with Jackson Dart. So a little taste of the Giants roster, what to expect in terms of the matchup in Denver in the Mile High against the Broncos coming up here in Week 7. As that is going to wrap up Tuesday's edition of Big Blue Kickoff Live. It's presented by Cadillac, the official luxury vehicle of the New York Giants. We're broadcasting from the Giants Podcast Studio, presented by Hackensack Meridian Health. Keep getting better. The archive of this show, our entire podcast network, is on the Giants mobile app, podcast platforms everywhere, and at giants.com/podcast, which means if you can't find this podcast, that's on you more so than any of us. That'll wrap things up. Matt, great conversation as always. Stay locked to Giants.com for all the latest, and we'll speak to you on Wednesday right here on Big Blue Kickoff Live. Have a good one.